皆様こんにちは。ブラックストーンのプライベートウェルス部門で日本、韓国の責任者を務めております藤田です。本動画ではブラックストーンプライベートエクイティストラテジーズ CEO のバイラルパテルとともにブラックストーンのプライベートエクイティ部門の強みや具体的な投資事例、そして日本における投資機会についてニューヨークよりお届けします。1987年以降、ブラックストーンのプライベートエクイティ戦略は様々な市場サイクルを通じて投資を行ってきた長い実績があります。こうした異なる市場環境を乗り切るにあたって、ブラックストーンの主な強みや競争優位性はどこにあるとお考えでしょうか。さらに、投資先企業の価値向上を図る上での強みについても教えてください。
Well, first, thank you for having me. This is going to be a great opportunity to talk a lot about what you just said, right? We are seeing a lot of volatility in the market today, and it's helpful to think about how different private equity managers manage through that volatility. And I would say for Blackstone, one of the key competitive advantages that we have is really the breadth of our strategies, right? What we can do differently than many managers at the firm is invest across a variety of different strategies that perform differently in different market cycles. So as an example, we invest in buyouts, in growth, in life sciences, in secondaries, and in hybrid opportunistic transactions. Those strategies perform differently in different markets, and importantly allows us to deploy capital in different cycles and earn a return in different cycles. Now, the other place that you see the competitive advantage that we have in terms of navigating cycles like this is our data advantage, right? Blackstone manages over $1.3 trillion of assets globally in the private markets. That gives us a tremendous amount of information across the markets, right? We're looking at how different sectors are performing. We're looking at signals that we're seeing in our companies about where the world might be going. That allows us to not only get ahead of market cycles and position our portfolio companies and investments in the best light, but it also means during those cycles, we can think about when we're coming out of them and where we really like to put our capital to work.
2025年のパフォーマンスに大きく貢献した案件が北米でナンバーワンの商業用空調システムメーカーでありますエアコントロールコンセプトです。この投資事例はブラックストーンの企業価値向上の取り組みがいかに差別化された成果を生み出しているかを示す好事例だと考えます。これまでどのように企業価値向上を実現してきたのか、ぜひ教えてください。
So listen, I think air is another really great example of the types of business that we have been able to add a lot of value to at Blackstone. And so just to give folks a sense, air is a manufacturing reps business for heating and cooling systems. So these are engineers, Salesforce people that work with companies that want to install heating and cooling equipment into their footprints, but work with a engineering firm to design that equipment. And we at Air work with the customer and we work with the manufacturers to be able to create it. Now, what was really exciting about this business for us was not necessarily just the market growth of the commercial HVAC business. What was interesting to us about this business is what we might be able to go do with it. And one of the fastest growing areas of commercial HVAC today is actually in data centers. And Air had no data center exposure. Now, if you look at Blackstone, we have a tremendous footprint in the data center space. And so one of the things that we did as part of our investment thesis to create value is we introduced the CEO of our air controls business with the CEO of our data center business. And by having those two work closely together, they've been able to create opportunities to create revenue synergies going forward. So now going forward into 2026, 27 and beyond, a portion of the revenues that Air is going to generate are actually going to come from Blackstone portfolio companies that are shifting their spend over to this end of the market. And so that's a good example from an operating team perspective of one of the things that we like to do. We like to create the opportunities for these companies to work well together, to really drive revenues. It's because of our size and our scale that we can really drive that. The other thing when it comes to the thesis for Air is M&A. We thought there was a tremendous opportunity to make acquisitions to be able to grow the platform organically. So we've actually, inorganically, we've actually made 35 acquisitions since we started. So a tremendous amount of growth just from being able to buy different businesses around our core business and expand geographically. So Europe is a good example of that. We've been able to introduce the management team into the European market, which is an area they didn't otherwise have. And then the last thing, and this is similar to a lot of our theses, we spent time working with the existing management team to upgrade their talent, right? Really looking across the board and saying, where are the gaps from an organizational and a management team perspective, adding those resources into the company so that when they scale, when they do that M&A, they can do it in a way where the infrastructure is there and in place to be able to support that level of growth. So it's an absolutely wonderful business. We love the management team there, and we're excited about the growth prospects.
少し異なる形態で投資をしておりますグロース投資についてもお伺いしていきたいと思います。特にアンソロピックですとかオープン AI、この分野は、ブラックストーンがここ数年 AI のバリューチェーン全体にわたって投資をしてきた、その中で見つけた、案件ということが言えるかと思います。これら2社がブラックストーンの幅広い AI 投資の投資テーマの中で、どのように位置づけられているかぜひ聞かせてください。
Well, this is actually part of a broader thesis that we have around trying to invest up and down the AI value chain. Right? So we're doing everything from energy investments that's being driven by AI. We're doing the data center and investments that are services companies around the data center, like an Air that we just talked to. But importantly, we also want to have exposure to the application layer in AI. If you think about past technological cycles, whether it's internet, mobile, cloud, historically, a significant amount of value has been created on the application side. And I think what we're now starting to see is the application side of the market is maturing and is becoming much more investable than it was maybe 3-4 years ago. We can now start seeing trends that are more financially analyzable, views on profitability that we can take. And so we started thinking about wanting to make investments in the application layer. So OpenAI and Anthropic were two ways to have exposure into that application side of AI. So both tremendously high growth businesses. OpenAI created the market for LLMs really in terms of when they came onto the world stage with ChatGPT, over 900 million monthly active users. So you really have a tremendous platform, strong brand value, a history of innovation and creativity. So that was a company that we wanted to have exposure to. Anthropic, also very, very fast growing, and certainly in the last few months has made a lot of headlines. I would say that company is a little bit more of a focus for us on enterprise adoption. Like one of the things that we were seeing in our portfolio companies was a strong desire on the part of our CTOs to really invest and build on enterprise adoption of AI into their environments. And Anthropic is a wonderful way to play that theme. So both of these companies, fast-growing investments in a space that we think is going to grow tremendously in the coming years. And part of the way to think about this also is a way to gain exposure to AI disruptors as a little bit of a hedge against some of the disruption that's happening in the market. So if you think about what you've seen in public markets in the last 2-3 months, you've seen software multiples re-rate. OpenAI, Anthropic are a way of for our platform, earning a return in areas that are doing that disrupting, right? Which is so important when you think about trying to build an overall portfolio.
最後にせっかくですので、やはりアジアの中でどういった投資機会を見抜いていらっしゃるのか、ぜひ聞きたいと思います。日本の銘柄で何か注目しているようなものがあれば教えていただけますか？
A few things I guess I would say on that. First, Japan is an incredibly important market for us. Not just because of our client relationships that we have there, but increasingly from the investing side. And you've seen that really in the last couple of years in terms of the activity that has increased for us in terms of investments that we've made in the market. So in 2024, as an example, we acquired Infocom, which is a top provider of online comics in the country for $1.7 billion. And then last year, in August of 2025, we announced the acquisition of Technopro for $3.3 billion. Now, that actually represents Blackstone's largest investment in Japan to date. And I think it's a really good example of our ongoing commitment to that market. Technopro is Japan's #1 specialized engineering services provider. It delivers mission-critical solutions in IT system development, in product design, and frankly, R&D for both the hardware and and software side. So it's the type of business that we think in this market can do incredibly well, particularly as you think about so many of these businesses that are going through these digital transformations right now, and with the Japan market moving much more into a growth mindset going forward. So that's kind of how I would talk about the overall perspective on Japan. And then, I'd say more broadly, one of the key differentiators that we have for Blackstone is how we identify and underwrite opportunities. And we use advanced AI tools to kind of sharpen our investment judgment, to stress test assumptions, and to bring to the surface risks and opportunities earlier in the process, right? Because if we can start identifying issues early, we can then get on top of them quicker, we can improve our speed to market, we can come up with solutions faster when we're diligencing a company, working with a company, or even trying to sell our company. So we're active users of these sorts of tools with our investment teams to make sure that they can ask better questions, and frankly, we all can make more informed decisions. And by doing that, we should be able to get to a better precision around how we underwrite, and hopefully then lead to greater outcomes for our portfolio companies. Now, a lot of that work sits within our BXOT, so our Blackstone operating teams at the firm. One of the benefits of having $1.3 trillion of assets under management is we can build a very scaled business with best in class across a lot of the different areas that our companies are going to need. So whether that's talent and organizational design, procurement, across the board. We talked about data scientists earlier. That team sits there. We have actually over 100 operating executives that work with us to help drive our businesses. We've also made strategic hires across our operating team to strengthen AI at the leadership level, like directly supporting our portfolio company performance and frankly, the firm-wide value creation that we have. So overall, I think we're really excited about the opportunities across Asia, and particularly Japan, and also how our AI-enabled approach is helping us to identify, underwrite, and ultimately scale high-quality investments in the region.
ありがとうございます。以上、ブラックストーンがどのように投資先企業を見つけ、そしてその投資先企業のバリューを向上させ、そしてしっかりと収益を伸ばしていく。これらが皆様のリターン創出の源になっているということがお分かりいただけたんではないかなと思います。本日はご清聴いただきまして誠にありがとうございました。